Today we're looking at podcast creation apps AudioBoo and Spreaker Radio.
And then we'll dig just a little bit deeper to learn some of the tricks for recording audio on Android.
All that in a tight 30 minutes today on the App Clinic. So what is a podcast creation app?
Yeah, I was wondering that myself because I know about podcast apps. And when I first saw that this is what we were doing, I thought, oh, let me bring out, Beyond Pod, Dogcatcher, and all my favorites.
It's a popular category.
But this is different. These apps often will let you listen to a podcast, but they're really geared towards the creator of the podcast.
Absolutely. So it's an interesting idea. It's this notion that you have a phone, it has a microphone. A lot of the times when you want to be creating cool content to share with people, you're going to be out and about. Why not do that on your phone?
Sure.
So there's actually not a huge number of podcast creation apps out there, or at least not that I could find. So we're going to have a look at a couple today, which have been around for a little while, and look at what they've done right, what they could have done better, and then dig a little bit deeper and maybe share some of that knowledge as to how you can create an app which does something similar, particularly because it seems like it may be an underserved market. So let's have a look at the key sort of features for podcasting. So the essential things which you're going to need: record audio.
Sure.
Right? That seems like a fairly straightforward one.
But not just record audio. And this is really important because the way that these apps differ from a normal recording app is that they need to record a lot of audio. They need to stay recording for a very long period of time.
Absolutely. And of course you need to be able to do that audio playback, and not just for the podcast which you create, but also for other podcasts from the community which you generally belong to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's an absolute necessity, but it seems to be a really popular feature.
Yeah, I think it helps you to become a better part of that community if you understand some of the things which other people are doing, help be inspired.
Absolutely. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit on playback in terms of effects and being able to jump to different places in the podcast, being able to mark times. I mean, there's a big wish list that I would have for one of these apps.
And that's some of the stuff which we've got covered here in sort of podcasting plus. And so it's signing in with Google Plus because we're from Google and we like that. I use Google Plus a lot, so it would be kind of handy for me.
And of course, you can insert the social network of your choice here
Absolutely.
as long as it's supported on the vast majority of all Android phones.
Precisely.
Which, Google Plus is because of the way we do login on Android.
It would also be interesting, the whole point of doing podcasts on your phone, which is arguably not the best platform for recording audio, is that you can do it while you're on the go. So having some more integration with geolocation, mapping, so that you can see where these broadcasts are coming from, I think would be really nice.
Absolutely.
And finally, exactly what Ian was referring to, some more device editing. So being able to trim the beginning and endings off your podcast, being able to do some audio manipulation, I think would be a real win.
Now, one thing that a lot of people miss on this, now I've worked in the professional audio recording space for video games for a long time, and one of the most important features that consumer apps don't have that pro apps generally do is what we call punch in, punch out. And the idea that you could just hit a button and say, I'm recording now, and then hit another button and either say, I'm not recording, but I'm going to again, or what's even more important is to be able to press a button and say, I want to remember this place. So either that's some place where I messed up and I wanted to edit that out, or it's something that I did really well and I want to be able to emphasize that, or I want to be able to put a bookmark there. That sort of functionality would be really, really cool to see in these apps, and it wouldn't be all that difficult to deliver in a mobile form factor.
Awesome. So we're going to take a closer look at two apps today, the beta version of AudioBoo 2, sequel to AudioBoo, and Spreaker Radio.
Now that's not speaker radio.
No, but
It's
Spreaker.
Spreaker radio.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly, because Spreaker is a completely different word and
is
is not Pennsylvania Dutch as I had assumed.
Indeed not. In fact, you probably just want to look that up on your internets to find out the exact definition
Yes.
there. But
because we can't say it here; it's unprintable.
it's just we can't do it. So AudioBoo is an app that I remember from my days as a developer advocate back in London, and I got to know the team behind AudioBoo V1 pretty well as they were sort of navigating the waters of audio recording and processing on Android back in the V1 1.2 days, which is 1.1, which is a long way back now. So I know that they're going to be pretty happy to get some candid feedback on this beta of version 2. Now keep in mind that this is a beta, so there's likely to be plenty of rough edges, and spoilers, there are. But generally speaking, that's the best time to really give that sort of feedback, and I'm sure that they would appreciate that feedback directly if any of you guys choose to check it out. Now, first off, I'm not a huge fan of the icon or the feature page. Now, there's a pretty good chance that they've left it this way on purpose because they're in beta and they're not ready to reveal their sort of new modern branding. But even still, users are going to form an early opinion of that app from the first time that they use it, even if it is in beta. So it's worth getting this right kind of straight away.
Now, I do like their feature graphic. I think that it's actually kind of nice and clean, and it pretty much says exactly what the app is about. The problem is that they've reused that feature graphic for the icon, which is completely inappropriate. It's tough too because they're using that sort of generic microphone symbol, which it says recording, but it doesn't say AudioBoo recording.
Exactly, and it's interesting because they've used a lot of their own nomenclature and branding throughout the app. The things that you record aren't podcasts, they aren't anything else, they are boos. Just makes sense, but if you're going to have that kind of branding, you want to make that rich right from the outset to try and provide that consistency. Now, personally, I would love to see a richer feature graphic. Ian disagrees, but I think the icon, I think we can both agree, could do with some
It'd be
work.
great to see an icon that's a distinctive silhouette, maybe building on the microphone icon, but making it their own.
Exactly. So let's dive in and take a bit of a look at the app. Now, the first time that you start the app, you're presented with a walkthrough, and you can see the first page of the walkthrough here. And there's a few issues related to that. You can see straight away that the design language here is decidedly non-Android. We've got buttons which don't look like Android buttons, and in fact, we've got 3 very similar but subtly different button styles all on this front page. And to make things a little more confusing, as a user, I'm presented with 4 options when I open this app for the first time. Now, I'm not actually in the app, but I already have to choose. Do I want to record a boo? I don't know what that is yet, but that's an option. Do I want to listen to the welcome message? Do I swipe to be able to read through the walkthrough, or skip the walkthrough? Now, that's a lot of decisions to have to make when I launch the app before I'm actually doing anything. So I'd recommend reducing this to as close to 0 as possible. So in my mind, the best apps present you with a UI that lets you get started straight away. No interstitials, no walkthroughs, no explanations. Walkthroughs are particularly problematic because it really suggests that your app needs careful instructions to be able to understand how it needs to be used. Now, I'm not sure that that's the case for an app like this. You would think if someone's gone to the trouble of downloading it, they get the general idea. This is an app to be able to record audio and share it online. And I'd like to think that you could get to that process much more quickly than having to go through all of these steps and walkthroughs beforehand. So here, I've skipped through the walkthrough and it's asking me to sign in. And once again, I've got like 1,000 options. Do I log in? Do I register? Have I forgotten my password? Maybe I want to sign in with Twitter, or maybe I want to browse without signing in. Now, all of these things are on the page. Most of them have slightly different UI elements. There's 4 buttons, but they're in 2 different colors. Does that mean anything? Do the different colored buttons represent a different kind of choice? If I've forgotten my password, that's a link. So there's all of these different ways of being able to proceed, and it can be quite confronting to a new user to try and figure out, I just want to get to the app. Now, I should point out that both the first screen and this screen both have a button that will just let you skip forward to the actual app itself, but it's kind of buried amongst all this other stuff. So again here, I'd really suggest that you try and cut that down as much as possible, make it as simple as you can, make that login process as simple as you can, and possibly put that further into your app once you get to the point where they need to be logged in to do something. Now again, in terms of UI, you've got some very non-standard Android controls on screen, and I noticed that even the text views are custom. They don't actually display the cursor position when I have them selected. And it's worth noting that the buttons themselves don't respond visibly to being touched. So again, you press the button, nothing happens until you let go and you're taken to the next screen. And again, I'd kind of like to see Google Plus sign-in available as an option here. Now, once I get through all of this, I get to an empty screen with a loading dialog. I've already spent several minutes clicking through logins, looking through walkthroughs, so it seems that by this point, I've spent a lot of time. It should have been enough time to prefetch enough data so that these first screens can pop up instantly and have the data that you want. So you want to take advantage of that startup time, particularly if you have logins, walkthroughs, anything like that, to pre-populate the data, at least the first page and anything within a click of that first landing page. You can also probably notice that along the bottom here, there's some buttons. and they're totally blank. And I'm guessing that's related to some sort of custom control that they've built and it's not rendering properly. Again, one of the risks of building things from scratch when there's perfectly good built-in framework components which do that same thing for you. Along the top, they have tabs that aren't really tabs. I can't swipe between them. There's a bright pink record tab that's in the middle, which makes me think that's what's selected. It isn't. It's also not a tab. It's a shortcut to the record screen. And I can see what they're doing here. It's the most important thing. So you make that big and bright. But again, it's not obvious what's happening here. It's not a button, it's a tab. It looks like the tab is selected, and so I'm confused. How do I get it to record something? So again, you want to think about that design language. Think about what a new user is going to think. And an easy way to do this is to give this app to someone who you've told nothing about what it is. Preferably someone who's not very good with computers or smartphones, and see how they react. Do they click the right button to begin with? And use analytics to see how this goes, particularly in something like beta. I'm hoping that the team here is using analytics to find out which of their features are discoverable. Now on the plus side, we've got the ability to listen to community recordings, track our own recordings, but again, you need to wait for each of these lists to load before they get displayed. So as I click through the tabs, I get that same loading page, and every time I click, I get the same loading page again. So you want to do some caching, you want to do some prefetching to make sure that all of this stuff kind of happens in the background without you having to sit there and wait for it. Now, if we move on to the meat of the app, the recording screen, or as Ian christened it earlier today, the confidence screen. Same issues here, non-standard buttons, a multitude of options. There's 3 buttons to press here. Really, I just want to record and then finish recording. As it happens, only the pause and record button is really relevant until I'm done, unless you're providing functionality like punch in, punch out that Ian was describing earlier. So it makes sense not to confuse the UI with options that aren't really relevant or available to me yet. Now I like the countdown clock combined with the counter, and the dot matrix view to see the audio levels looks quite nice. But I'd love to see them go a couple of steps further with this. Firstly, change the bounce animation. So right now, as you're recording audio, it's basically a triangle that's going to go up or down depending on the audio level. I like to see something like a spectral analyzer, so I can see, which frequencies are being recorded. It's kind of non-trivial to implement, but it looks really awesome. So it's something which may be worth looking at.
I think, well, do you want to have a spectrum with more elements than 16?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, I think you could do a 16 element.
I think a 16 element would be fine. You just want something which gives you more than just volume.
I actually think that it might be a spectral analyzer. I was trying some different frequencies. It's hard to do with your voice, but I think I noticed a few differences. I think they actually might be doing like a Fourier transform on that.
That would be kind of cool.
It would be.
All right, we'll have to investigate further, or perhaps the AudioBoo guys can reach out and let us know if I'm just being an idiot.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it's generally the case.
The idiot part, yeah.
Yeah, well, clearly. Ian also pointed out how nice it would be to see the audio levels over time, so that I confirm the things that I've been recording have actually been recording. So basically just that volume, but over a period of time to see how it all goes. And again, if you take it to that next step and provide some ability to do edits, to do punch-in, punch-outs, it's a really easy way for you to be able to see where those different segments of your audio are. Now, once I'm done, I have this awesome button up the top, which is a slave/delete button, which is quite a dichotomy. And I'd really strongly suggest that you separate these. It's very unlikely that anyone's going to be particularly comfortable hitting a button that says either save or delete. It's a 50-50 chance. We'll see what happens. That said, the recording itself seemed to work pretty well. I didn't notice any issues. I think, Ian, you said that there were some cutouts when you were doing some testing?
Well, I did get a dropout on playback, but I think that's actually a reported bug for JB 4.2.2 that there are some cases where AudioTrack or OpenSL can drop the last few milliseconds of a track.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I didn't notice any problems. It could very well be our fault. But anyway, in any case, that all seemed to work pretty well. And I'd really love to see, like I said, that ability to start, to trim the start and ends of my boos before I upload them and publish them online. So overall, it's an interesting app. It shows a lot of promise, but also needs a lot of work, particularly on the UI UX, to make it more responsive, simpler, easier to get started. And overall, it really just needs to take a close look at the Android design guidelines and see if you can make it a little bit more consistent with that sort of way of interfacing with users.
Spreaker. Fails
Yes.
test 1 with a complete lack of feature graphic. The icon is pretty good though.
The icon is pretty good.
Love to see them go the whole way, drop the box, and use the distinctive silhouette exclusively, because that is a very distinctive silhouette.
It's kind of nice, right? You can see it here. You've got that black silhouette with the Spreaker. That's too many words which sound like that but aren't. Sort of logo built into the headphones, which is quite neat. So they've got a couple of really neat branding elements here, and I'd love to see them just focus on that and exclude the rest.
Now, of course, we've done a great favor to the Spreaker team and previewed the silhouette-only version of their icon automatically on the bottom of our page here. Not right now, but yeah,
True,
because
they
did happen to use the same color of chroma key green that we use for the transparency
Exactly.
here.
So let's take a look at how that would look.
There we go.
Yeah, so that's exactly the way which we think it should look, is just like this.
Right, with
Just
Reto's
that
hand
black
behind it.
Well, exactly. You know, that can help to really reinforce the branding. My hand. So we have a welcome screen here which tells us everything we probably already knew before we downloaded it from Google Play. And unfortunately, there is a menu button of shame. A menu button does absolutely nothing, which is unfortunate. Looking at the app, once I spent a bit of time in there, I realized this is probably an app that hasn't really been touched since probably somewhere around the gingerbread days. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much, particularly as the developers here didn't self-nominate. They didn't ask for candid feedback, so I'm not going to be too harsh. But it's definitely an example of where you've got an app which was launched much earlier on in the life cycle. You don't want to abandon that. You don't want to launch and forget. Mobile phones, Android in particular, the UX has really taken a step forward over the last few releases. So it's a good opportunity to go back, update those apps. And we've seen several apps that we've looked at on the App Clinic, Grocery IQ, I think, being the most notable that I can recall, which have done a complete holo-based UX redesign recently. And I think it really shows how effective that can be. So once we get past that, we can't continue without signing in, which is unfortunate, as it's going to alienate a lot of users who aren't willing to create yet another account or log in with the particular social media option that you have available. So at the very least, I would like to see Google Plus, some of the, basically just having one social media network. It is a choice, but in this instance, it means that I need to choose to either create a new account or log in with a particular social media. So I struggled, actually, as it happens, I really struggled to actually get into the app, and most users won't really have the patience for that. It took a whole bunch of having to jump through hoops and then create the accounts, and then it sent me an email, and then I had to have responded to the email before I could actually log in on the phone. It was kind of painful, so you want to avoid that kind of pain wherever possible. Once we get into the app itself, again, most of the features are very similar to AudioBoo. UX, UI issues, which are from an older version of Android, not going to dwell on that. The confidence recording screen here, you can see that their UI is fairly non-standard in a way that isn't a bad thing. But for UI features like buttons and drop-downs, there's really a lot to gain by sticking to the standard rather than going your own way or trying to implement your own versions of that. The recording experience is actually pretty similar to what we saw in AudioBoo, so I'd really offer a lot of the same feedback. And again here, we would like to see more than just the amplification, but something which gives you an idea of how the recording is going over time, the frequencies being recorded now. So that's particularly important for Spreaker, whose model is live broadcasts rather than pre-recorded podcasts. So the idea here is that it's more like a live radio station that you fire up, you do your thing, and people tune in live rather than downloading podcasts to listen to. So I'm going to keep that pretty short. I think we can probably turn to Ian, our resident audio expert, who has some tips for how you can ensure that your audio recording works and is of the kind of quality that you really need it to be on Android.
You bet. So thanks, Reto. Let's see if we can get this working. Oh, look at me. Awesome. All right. So on the surface, recording on Android is dead simple. It hasn't changed for years. You create an audio record object, and then you call read in a loop, and read returns a buffer full of audio samples, and you take those samples and write them to some kind of persistent storage. And at the same time, you probably want to use those samples or some boiled down version of them to create that confidence UI, which is either the bouncing LED type of thing, or maybe a little waveform, or a spectral analyzer, just something to let your user know that something's actually happening. But it turns out that we have the same problem that we have in audio in general when we're doing recording, and that's the problem of latency. Usually when we talk about latency in audio, we're talking about the latency in the audio drivers and hardware, which is usually measured in a relatively small number of milliseconds. Now, for some devices that might be hundreds of milliseconds, but still, we're talking about a fraction of a second. But for recording, we actually have a different problem, especially for the type of recording that we're doing, where the audio is not going to fit into the RAM of the device. It's not going to fit into the heap allocated to your application. It's going to need to go into persistent storage or onto the network, somewhere other than where it is right now. So in that case, we're talking about a latency number that can get very, very large, up into the multiple seconds. So I actually sat down with Jean-Michel Trivy and Glenn Caston, two of our audio engineers, this morning, and we had a yap about the old times and talked about recording on Android. And this is one of the things that I hadn't realized, but Glenn said on the Nexus 7 he could actually measure 3 to 4 seconds of latency going from memory to persistent storage, in that case to flash memory. So we're actually talking about a very long period of time. Now, once things get started, the flash memory is capable of writing just as fast as the microphone is producing data, much faster actually, but it takes a while to get started. So of course, we need to fix this with our old friend threads and extra buffers. That's the way we fix every audio problem, is with a little bit of extra buffering. So here's how we do it. We want to have one thread that is dedicated to recording. The way that the audio record API is set up, you really don't have a choice on this, because audio record first is a blocking API. When you call read, it will block until the data has been read. Second, it's not a guaranteed delivery API. In other words, if you don't call read often enough, you simply will miss data. The data will just go off to some other app or into the bit bucket, and you won't read it at all, so you get a dropout. So you want one thread that's doing nothing but call read over and over and over again. That's the record thread in this diagram. So every time it gets a buffer, it does two things. First, it's going to pass it off to a write buffer, which is going to be a very, very long buffer that's being read by another thread, the storage thread. The second thing it's going to do is pass some version of that audio data off to the UI thread, so that it can create the confidence UI. And usually this is going to either be RMS level, or it's going to be a spectral analysis, or just something to let us know that things are still happening. Of course, if the latency on the SD card is very high, then you're going to end up with an awful lot of data stacked up in the write buffer. And software being what it is, sooner or later you're going to get into a situation where it won't all fit. Now, if you're running into this condition a lot, that means you probably made your write buffer too small, and you're going to need to enlarge it. But even with the biggest write buffer in the world, someone somewhere on some device is going to end up running out of space. Maybe they're running too much in the background, or maybe the SD card is filling up, or maybe there's an abundance of cosmic rays in their neck of the woods, and all their devices are beginning to inexplicably fail. Whatever the condition, you need to be prepared for it. So how do you do that? Well, when you run out of record thread space, so in other words, when the record thread can't write to the write buffer anymore, that's when you need to signal a dropout to the UI thread. So there's two lessons here. First is that you need to make sure that whatever you're using for a write buffer, it has the ability to handle a single writer, single reader, multi-threaded case, and it has some size that it can signal back when it's full to the write thread, so that you don't, so that you can detect these dropout cases. And then you just, you want to turn your UI red or whatever it is that's going to let your user know that some audio is going to miss. And that way they can either stop the recording and try again, or whatever action they want to take. Now, there's a number of other things you can do to make this sort of app better, and we don't have time to go over all of them in depth. But let's talk about just a couple. For instance, Reto already mentioned that running a simple Fourier transform, even just an 8 or 16 element transform over your audio will let you do a little bit of spectral analysis. Doing an even more or larger Fourier transform with maybe 256 elements would let you do things like show whether there is excessive noise in the input signal, which could be really useful in a mobile app. Or you might want to use the new media codec API that came out in Jelly Bean, and you could use that to access the FLAC encoder or the MP3 encoder so that what you write to persistent storage is smaller. You don't have to do as much processing because that's possibly a hardware accelerated stage. I don't actually think that for audio it is, but it could be. In any case, we're talking about things that take a lot of processing power. Not just spectral analysis, but perhaps multiband compression or automatic gain control. All of these things will make your audio recording sound significantly more professional. Now, we don't have any samples ourselves in the Android group that would show you how to take advantage of the processing power on a mobile device for this type of audio. But before the show, I Googled render script and audio and came up with a bunch of GitHub projects from people who have done this exact thing using RenderScript. Now, RenderScript has the benefit that it works on pretty much all Android platforms now. It doesn't require you to know anything about the underlying architecture, and it's really super fast for doing the sorts of things that you're likely to do when you're trying to process a podcast. So I'd encourage you to take a look into that if you're looking for professional audio features. With that, back to Reto.
So our next step is to take a closer look at today's apps and see how close they are to being pure Android. Now I think given the place that each of them are, particularly AudioBoo being in beta and Spreaker being, I think, an app which hasn't been updated particularly recently in terms of UI and UX, that they're probably a little distance from that. But we would suggest to those developers to start by going through each of these checklists, particularly while you're still in beta, to find out how much closer you can get to being pure Android and really make that launch a success. Until then, you can find our Pure Android collection at bit.ly/pureandroid, and you can nominate your app for consideration by adding it to our Trello page by searching for App Clinic Trello. And you'll see there exactly what topics we have planned for the next few weeks. In fact, next week, we are going to be experimenting with the App Clinic by holding a special session for the members of the Prague Google Developers Group. So we're going to be recording that early next week and putting it online for you guys to check out sometime after that. This is a new initiative that we're going to try out to try and get some of these GDGs more involved with the process here. So if you are part of a GDG or run a GDG, let us know and we'll see if we can include you in the schedule.
All right, we'll be back later in the week to look at what is later in the week?
Weather. I think we're looking at weather apps.
We are looking at weather apps, and the Android Design in Action is also.
I'm not sure. I think so.
Point.
I think the Design in Action team should also be looking at weather. I'm not sure if Roman's going to be available, so maybe Nick and Adam taking a look at weather apps. But we'll check in with them and find out.
Sounds good. Well,
so until next week, I'm Reto Meier.
And I'm Ian Nee Lewis.
And this has been the App Clinic.